Welcome to the special meeting of the Bakersfield City Council. Now speaking, the Honorable Mayor Karen K. Go.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to call to order the 4 p.m. City Council meeting of October 21st, 2020. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Go.
Here.
Vice Mayor Parlier.
Here.
Councilmember Rivera. Councilmember Gonzalez. Councilmember Weir.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
I'm here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Here.
And Councilmember Sullivan.
Thank you. On March 4th, Governor Newsom declared a state of emergency in California due to the threat of COVID-19. The governor also passed several executive orders, including the suspension of some components of the Brown Act related to public meetings like this one. As such, Councilmember Smith is participating by phone, and all council votes tonight will be conducted by roll call. Due to the governor's executive order, which waived the Brown Act provisions of requiring physical presence of the public in light of the pandemic, public comments have been encouraged to be made by mail and email and phone call to the city clerk. Those received in such manner have been provided to the council. If you're here to speak in person to make a public statement, please fill out a speaker card, give it to the clerk. All statements will be given a 3-minute time limit, 15 minutes per topic. If you have written comments that are longer than your verbal statement, please give those to the clerk, who will give copies to the council. If you're here to speak on a workshop matter, we ask that you speak after staff's presentation on that matter. We're very interested and concerned with your issues. However, due to the public notice requirement of the Brown Act, council can't take action when an item isn't on the agenda. The council can, however, refer your matter to committee or request that staff contact you. Again, please avoid any behavior that disrupts the meeting, such as repetitive statements or going over the 3-minute time limit. Madam Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
We do not.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Under Workshops, review of Chapter 2 of the Council Policy and Procedure Manual.
Thank you. Madam City Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. At your last council meeting, the Vice Mayor asked me to review your council policy and procedure manual, and in particular to bring forward to you Chapter 2 of that manual and provide some critiques. So in front of you tonight, you should have a copy of that Chapter 2. It's a rather thick, it's about a ½ inch, and it has about 50 pages in it. And just for your visual, I have here, you can see this is your entire City Council policy and procedural manual. It fills up about a 5-inch ring binder, so you can see it's fairly voluminous. And we have a very short slideshow for you today, or PowerPoint. Let's try this one. All right, here we go. So within this huge binder that I'm showing you, you actually have 9 chapters within that binder. And in front of you is the table of contents, and each one of those is the chapter. And again, tonight we're going to be focusing on Chapter 2, Council Proceedings. I think perhaps the Vice Mayor in the minutes may have indicated Chapter 5, but we spoke later. It's actually Chapter 2 that he would like me to go over with you tonight. Within each one of these chapters, each one of the 9 chapters, there's sections. And in Chapter 2 specifically, here are the 17 sections that we're going to review tonight. Each one of those sections is basically a resolution. So there's 17 resolutions that are in Chapter 2. And sometimes the resolution has an exhibit or an attachment. Sometimes that's also another resolution. So again, it can get somewhat convoluted. And what I'm going to do tonight is go through these 17 sections. Again, it's not going to take me very long. They're fairly simple in nature. And I'm going to summarize what each one is. And then, again, at the Vice Mayor's request, I'm going to give you just a consideration. Perhaps you want to leave it alone. Perhaps you want to repeal it. Perhaps you want to clarify it. We don't need to do that tonight. I'm just going to provide you with a consideration. Are you running it, Lena, or am I hitting it? It seems to be really sensitive. I think we're okay. I mean, something seems to be working, so let's not jinx us. So the first one is 2.1, and 2.1 basically provides what the mayor pro tem is. You all know that. Good evening, Councilmember Gonzalez. This basically says, look, if the mayor's absent and or the vice mayor is absent, what staff does and what the council should do is you look back to the individual that recently served as the vice mayor, and that individual is either the mayor or the vice mayor. My consideration for you is that you leave it alone. 2.2, seconds to motions. As you know, you follow Robert's Rules of Order unless you state otherwise. 2.2 basically says, in this particular situation, we are not going to follow Robert's Rules of Order. That is why you do not have seconds at motions at your council meetings. If you are interested, you may want to consider either A, leaving this alone, or clarifying that that also includes your council committee meetings. You may notice sometimes that we're in those council committee meetings. I don't require seconds to motions. 2.3 is abstentions from voting. That basically provides when a council member should abstain, and your current council policy says that a member should only abstain if it's A, something within the FPPC, so a conflict of interest, or perhaps a council member has been absent from a public hearing. That typically happens with your general plan amendments or your zone changes. Sometimes you're out for those public hearings. If you haven't had an opportunity to come back in and review those, again, watch the video, then again, that would be proper for you to abstain, or if there's an appearance of impropriety. My suggestion would be to leave it alone. The next one is a policy and procedure manual. Interestingly, this really outlines the reason for why you have this big binder. I would suggest that everything in this 2.4 resolution is correct and it's up to date, but it really shouldn't be buried under 2.4. It should go to the front of the manual, and that would be my critique on 2.4. 2.5, requests for transcripts. Back in the day, I think Councilmember Sullivan and Councilmember Weir may recall this, but some of your colleagues had a propensity to ask for transcripts of council meetings, and it was becoming very laborious for the city clerk, and so your council passed a resolution which went into the binder, and it basically said, look, if anyone wants an actual transcript of the meeting, you need to go through the city manager, and the city manager will then assign it out to the city clerk as resources become available. I would, again, consider leaving that one alone. 2.6, City Council Agenda Plan. That was back in the day. Some of you may remember this when you had your agenda. Particularly used to happen on your committee agendas. You used to actually approve what was on the agenda before you went on with the regular agenda. That is antiquated. It's no longer necessary. And this particular policy provided when you could move things around on the agenda. And again, some of you may recall that we used to have public hearings on land use matters. Your council meetings used to go until 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And the public hearings used to say that on this particular day, that's when the public hearing was going to open. Well, we don't really need this anymore, because when we publicize that in a newspaper, we say on this date or as soon thereafter as the matter can be heard. So there's really not a need anymore for the council or staff to rearrange things on the agenda before you get into that agenda. So again, you may want to consider repealing this particular resolution. 2.7, the granting of continuances. Again, there was a thought, and it did happen, that back in the day when individuals used to show up at BZA or Planning Commission or even your own council committee meetings, they would simply come up and they would say, look, I would like a continuance. And again, I think probably because of the lateness of the hour and the heaviness of your agendas back in the day, the council wasn't very pleased with that. And so you passed this particular resolution and said, look, if you're going to come and you're going to come to our different committees and our boards, you really need to express a reason why. You need to have good cause for a continuance. My suggestion to you, if you're so inclined, would be to repeal this. I think most people know that at this particular junction. in time, and I wouldn't think it's necessary. 2.8, this is when we first started, Councilmember Sullivan remembers this, when we first started televising through KGov. Actually not too long ago, but long enough. And KGov requested that you have a policy and a procedure in effect, and so that is where it is. It's under 2.8. My consideration for you is that maybe staff should contact KGov through the county, find out if everything in this policy is still up to date. And you actually have another resolution that we're going to get to in just a second under 2.11 that also talks about cable broadcasting. I would suggest again that we combine 2.8 and 2.11. 2.9, actually, again, something that you almost went through recently, but the city council vacancy appointment process. There's a procedure in your book that actually provides for how to appoint when there is a vacancy, but if it's less than 6 months left on the term. So this really wasn't a mirror image of what happened with Ward 1. And I would tell you that there's nothing in this particular resolution that's anything different than what the charter provides for. In addition to the fact, this is one of the resolutions, 2.9, that actually attaches another resolution to it, and it has a very convoluted voting process. And that resolution was actually repealed by your council in 2006. So the convoluted voting process that is used for 2.9 is no longer in existence. And the new voting process, as you all know, really is when you appoint someone, whether they're a ward appointment or they're non-ward appointment, the maximum number of votes gets it. So you can actually appoint somebody with 2 votes. That's actually in Chapter 8 of your council procedure and manual. So if and when you ever decide to upgrade or to review that and critique that, that may be something that you want to go over. But for 2.9, I would think that you may want to consider repealing that particular section. 2.10, closed session action. That basically outlines when the city attorney should come out after closed session into open session and announce how each of you voted and use your names with your corresponding vote. I would tell you that I would leave that alone. It follows state law and it's still applicable. 2.11, this was the one I just talked about a few minutes ago. Again, for some reason, there was another resolution added again to cover the cable broadcasts. It's very similar to the one in 2.8, so I think again that we should combine 2.8 and 2.11 after staff has had an opportunity to speak with the folks at KGov. 2.12, financial assistance to nonprofit groups. Again, this basically sets forth the template of how council should evaluate when a nonprofit group comes to you and requests funding. It's somewhat updated. I would think it's current. My only suggestion to you would be to consider you may want to move this to Chapter 4, which is the fiscal chapter. Of the 9 chapters, Chapter 2 and Chapter 4 are the most voluminous. Chapter 4 has actually 19 sections in it. But it would seem to be more relevant to move this one to Chapter 4 if you're so inclined. 2.13 is the streamlining of city council meetings. Again, this has to do with back in the day, there were council members that loved to suggest to the city manager that there should be workshops on certain subjects, and so you would have meetings and they would have just a ton of workshops on them. And this was done to basically say, look, the city manager will decide when that workshop comes back to the council, at what time it would be appropriate. My suggestion would be that you consider repealing it. That type of authority is already vested in the city manager and the city manager's office via the code. So it's really a reiteration of what's in the code, duplicative. 2.14 is the reimbursement of certain expenditures by the council. Again, that was done in conjunction with state law. You may remember AB 1234, which restricts what council can get reimbursed for. In order to have certain reimbursements, there needs to be a policy and a procedure in effect. This particular resolution sets forth an exhibit that's attached to that resolution, and it sets forth when you can actually apply and receive reimbursement from the taxpayers, and that is a result of ethic laws, and I would consider that you leave it as is. 2.15, the use of electronic communications during public meetings. This is one of the more updated sections that's in your policy manual. It basically tries to comply with the City of San Jose case that we have talked about before. And so if you use electronic communication right now in the dais during a public meeting and you're texting or you're sending emails out, this policy basically articulates that you need to notify the clerk, you need to notify your colleagues, and you need to take a copy of it. Again, this is in line with standard procedures throughout the state and because of updated state law. So my suggestion to you is to leave it as is. And two more, 2.16. This was passed by the council not too long ago. Given the budget woes that the state has had off and on during our history, particularly in 2010 and 2011, all the way through 2014, there are certain costs, mandated costs that are reimbursed as a result of the Brown Act. And when the state went through their budget crisis, they basically said that they weren't going to go ahead and reimburse cities for those state mandated costs. And so the city of Bakersfield said, regardless of whether or not we're reimbursed for those costs, we are still going to adhere to the Brown Act. I would indicate to you that I think you should repeal that. That law was, again, subsequently as the state entered into better years, they are now reimbursing those state mandated costs. I don't think you need to do that unless you're so inclined. You've already done that, as you know, with other things in recent history. I think it's, as the 9th largest city in the state of California, I don't think there's any indication that this council is not going to follow the Brown Act. 2.17, this is the last one. We provided this one when you went to the 3:30 regular council meetings. Again, I think you may want to consider repealing this because, again, under the municipal code, you, as the council, you set those regular meetings typically at the end of every year in December. So when December comes up this year, the clerk and the city manager are going to give you that typical calendar, and they're going to ask you to set the regular meetings at 3:30 and the regular meetings also at 5:15. So you don't need this one. It was nice to have it initially, but because you are now in the routine of doing that, I would suggest to you that there's not a need to have this. So in summary, of the 17 the 17 sections or resolutions that we looked at, here are just the ones that on the critique you may want to either clarify, or you may want to move around, or you may want to again consolidate with another one or repeal. When you look at that, if we were to do everything on that list exactly as I have suggested, I could probably get you down from 17 resolutions under Chapter 2 down to 9, maybe 10. So tonight, I'm certainly open for any questions that you may have. You have a couple of options. First of all, you can just kind of take this and reflect on it. You don't have to do anything. You can receive and file it. You may want to direct me to make all of those changes and come back to you, and I would have to come back to you with brand new resolutions, and you would have to vote on them. You'd have to vote on repealing what you have, and then again voting on any new resolutions that would clarify or that would combine, like the KGov situation. Or you could tell me to do something else. You could say, hey Jenny, I want you to add something else to Chapter 2. Maybe there's something else that you have in mind that's more applicable given the time frame. And maybe you want to take this piecemeal, and maybe you want either myself or someone from staff to come back and look at Chapter 4 or I would encourage you to look at Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is very small, and it deals with boards and committees and commissions. And for me, I would tell you that one really needs to be looked at because that talks about how you appoint various people, and I want to make sure that that's not in conflict with anything that you do in Chapter 2. So with that, I'm open for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Madam City Attorney. That was very clear, concise, and appreciate it. Madam Clerk, before we go to council for comments, did you receive any public speaker cards on this workshop?
I did not.
Thank you. Colleagues, does anyone wish to comment or ask a question? Councilmember Freeman, is that not working?
Yeah, there's no request on my thing.
IT, can we get some help here, please?
Anyway, yeah, thank you, Jenny. One question on the chapter that deals with appointments when someone. when someone resigns, we had said we were going to just clean up the language, I think, is the phrase you used, so that when this happens again, because it'll happen again, council people get new jobs, they die, they resign, these things are going to happen again. And in any case, if you resign with less than 6 months, or if you resign with 12 months, just make it crystal clear, here's how you do it, so we don't have any controversy about it. Legal, I could resign because I got a new job. That was the case this time. The job could fall through 9 months later, and I could rescind it the day before the election. So you don't want those things to happen. My point is just make it so it's clear, everybody understands the process, and we can't have any surprises. However you deem revising is up to you, just so we don't have lack of clarity on that.
Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, that's a very good point. I think both you and Councilmember Weir had mentioned that to me when we were going through the Ward 1 situation. I'm certainly open to going ahead and doing that with the understanding that I would need to have one with less than 6 months and more than 6 months.
Yes, exactly.
And I would want to bring it back to all of you, because at the end of the day, I mean, these are your decisions. I mean, these are policy decisions. And we can try to make it as airtight as we can, knowing that there's always, there's always room there for some argument. But I'm certainly open to doing that if that's your direction.
Well, I think the community wants the clarity.
Mm-hmm.
There was members of the community that were confused and didn't know, well, what happens if, and if. So, yeah, I just want clarity. That's all. So I hope and of course you're going to have to bring anything back to us. As far as the rest of it is concerned, I'd be happy to have you just bring back all of your recommended changes in one omnibus
Sure.
recommendation for the council, and let us clean these things up and move forward. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. Anyone else wishing to comment? Vice Mayor?
Thanks, Mayor. And Jenny, thanks again for doing this and going over it. And I concur with Bruce's recommendations, and please update the sections and repeal the sections of your recommendations. Hold on just 1 second. On 2.13, maybe meet and confer with the city manager and see if there's, what he would like to do on that one.
Sure.
On Chapter 8, I would like a review of that too, but I think it might be more advantageous that we do it after the new council is paneled.
Understood.
And also of Section 2, when you meet with the new council members when they come on, if you can do a little orientation tutorial
Sure.
of this too.
Sure.
And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Anyone else? Stephen Fine. Vice Mayor?
Well, we don't need a motion on this, right, Jenny, since we're coming back?
Yeah, my understanding is unless there's an objection, which I didn't hear, that you want me to direct that all the changes be made in addition to the comment by Councilmember Freeman, and then come back, and that's when you'll make your motions.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing nothing else on this portion, we are adjourned at 4:25.